Hello and welcome to the best project portfolio management show by Appfire. I'm Kerry Gorgone with Appfire, and I'm so excited today. We're going to talk with Fila Bertrand, our Director, Program and Change Management. He's directed Program Management Office in implementations and supported organizational change enablement. And I don't mean like a little project here and there. I mean the kind of things that feel like turning a cruise ship, like big, massive, very scary projects. And that's what we're going to talk about today is how you manage a company-wide initiative.
You've got questions about PPM, but you're afraid to ask? Well, wait no longer. Appfire presents the best project portfolio management show by Appfire.
Fila, thanks so much for being here today. And I think all of us have gotten a project at one point or another in our career and been like, huh? That sounds like really scary. So how do you do it? Where do you even start? Like when you're about to start a huge company-wide project, what do you need to?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me, Kerry. And it's fun, always fun to talk to you. And you're right. One thing that I've come to find out about people that are in the practice of program portfolio project management is that it's always been a very serendipitous type of journey, if you will. Right? I don't think that most people, they wake up one day and they're like, "Hey, man, you know what I want to be? I want to be a portfolio manager." Right? It's sort of like a bunch of successive decisions that have taken them there, but there's a little bit of predilection, I think, to deal with that kind of stuff, and you have to kind of like it, right? And so, but to your question about what are some of the things that you consider when you're launching a large company project?
One of the scary ones, the really scary ones, Fila.
The scary ones, right? I think, at least in my experience, what I've always tried to do is you first start. Well, there are three things. One is you work with whoever the leader is to create a very well-defined problem statement. You sort of assess where the organization is in terms of maturity, and then you develop a clear understanding as best as you can of the skill sets that will be needed to carry that project forward, and most importantly, how you're going to go about to procuring those skill sets, right? And so if you think about a well-defined problem statement, that really, it sounds sort of simple, but it's a number of repeated conversations with several members of the organization to really truly understand what it is that they're going after, right?
This is what I was just thinking about. So in these really big, multifaceted projects, there's some very important stakeholders from all across the org. How do you make sure that you're clear on what everyone wants and that they all agree what they want?
That's right. And so it's very conversational sometimes, and one conversation leads you to the other. And if you think about that, that well-formulated problem statement, you kind of go out and reach out to all these stakeholders and you present that and say, hey, my program sponsor could be a CEO, it could be a CFO, it could be the president of marketing sometimes, right? Vice president in some cases. My program sponsor is telling me that this is the problem that we're trying to solve. How does that resonate with you, right? And through those conversations, you kind of formulate it and then you present it back. And the important thing about that is that, that sort of presents itself as sort of like your guiding star in a large project, perhaps, especially if it takes, a year and a half. You always want to go back to that guiding principle, those tenets, if you will, that you can establish when you created that problem statement that you wanted to solve for.
In writing, you're talking about too. Like actually write it down. Don't just try to keep it in your head.
Yeah, because it's easy to forget. A month after you've started, a month could feel like a year, especially in these large initiatives.
So once you manage to get started, Fila, like what do you have to not do? What things should you avoid doing?
That's right. So you got a good problem statement defined. You assess the maturity of the organization just to determine how to approach the resolution of this problem. You understand what skill sets you need, and you'll be able to define how to procure them. Then, what you don't want to do is to be extremely rigid in your execution, right? And that basically means sometimes a couple of months into the project, you things are not exactly as you plan, or perhaps not as you expected, you have to be able to change. So avoid rigidity in the execution as much as you can. You also want to make sure that you don't disincentivize problem solving, right? And that basically means when you're working in a large project, you're interacting with a bunch of functional areas, a lot of subject matter experts, and the last thing you want to do is to negatively reward people that are constantly problem solving, right?
It's so
For you.
interesting. Negatively reward.
Yes. So you want to make sure that people are incentivized to identify problems, come to you or the key stakeholders with solutions, and then react positively to that. Right? Welcome. Let's call it the unearthing of problems along the way. And I think there's one thing that I really recommend. It's sort of I call it avoiding the sunk cost fallacy. And basically what that means is, you're halfway through a program. It's important to be open and don't be afraid of finding out things that you have to basically dispose of or just cancel, right? So an example would be, a large program with 16 projects. One of them is just not going well, and you're 6 months into it. And you realize that it really isn't something that you want to pursue anymore. Some people have the tendency just to want to see it through because they've already spent time, money, and resources on it, and that's a big problem, right? One of the things that you have to do is to be able to assess the situation presently and say, hey, you know what? At this particular point in time, it's no longer worth it. So let's go ahead and cancel this aspect of this program and move on.
I wanted to come back to something that you said about people coming to you, not just pointing out problems, but coming with solutions as well. So how do you, saying negatively, was it reward, incentivize or something? How do you get people to come to you with problems, even if the solution involves a lot of difficult things or a lot of people? Like if they know it's going to be hard to fix, that can be something people are reluctant to bring to your attention.
Yeah. So, I think the simplest thing is acknowledgement, right? And then really creating a process to sort of work through that with whoever is that individual who identified the problem, right? Because, historically, and it's been my experience sometimes that in large programs, you tend to not want to hear bad news, right? There's so much invested in a large project that, you usually want to get things done. And so, when people come up with problems, they either get ignored or, whatever they're trying to bring up to the table is sometimes dismissed as, let's call it complaints, right, or noise. And so if you do that enough times, people are just not going to come up, right? Because they're not, they know they're going to be ignored, and you basically are just going to, march through ignoring what people are telling you. And obviously, if you don't address those problems, they're always going to surface, and they tend to surface at the end, and it's kind of late, right? And so, you don't have to be extremely prescriptive to incentivize problem solving. You just have to be open and really engage with your stakeholders when they bring those things up.
So it's like when you're a teenager, if your parent comes to you with a difficult thing, you have to respond right away in a receptive manner and not shut the conversation down.
That makes sense. Or at least be comfortable with having those uncomfortable conversations, and it takes practice, because
so I'm a lawyer, Fila. I know all about uncomfortable conversations.
Exactly, and like you're almost done with a particular case, and then all of a sudden something pops up. You have to sort of acknowledge it first and foremost, and kind of work through it. And it's difficult, it's not easy.
What about wrapping up? So you definitely don't want to fall down right at the end.
You don't. There's a lot of things, obviously you have the project management, recommendations, right? And there's a lot of literature out there on what to do when you're closing projects or programs. I normally like to do three things. One is truly evaluate, or let's say objectively evaluate if you achieve what you wanted to achieve with the project, right? And that's basically answering the questions, hey, did you get what you wanted to get? And were there any unintended consequences, right? And so you do that always, and there's a lot of things that come out of that, but it's important for you to sort of go through that checklist, right? And because if you don't, some people just want to get done and move on to the next thing. If you don't, you really sort of miss the whole benefit of getting these things done, and then having a little bit of introspection of what you've done, which kind of leads to the second thing that I do, and that is consider what you've learned very carefully. And that is the two-part approach, right? One is, as a person, what have I learned in this journey? Because if you think about a large project, we're talking about 12 to 16 month period. That's a substantial amount of time you've invested in something. And so it behooves you as an individual just to sit back and kind of, there's got to be something that you learn personally. And then the second aspect is, what have I learned on behalf of my organization, right? What are some of the things that I can take back to my project sponsor, the CEO, or the other individuals that I've worked with that would benefit either their practice, their functional area, or the company, right? That's extremely important.
So
and the last thing I think is, it's to be intentional about practicing gratitude. When you're done with these large projects, it's important to be thankful and to express that to everybody that contributed to the success of the project, or to help you realize that some things needed to be, as we mentioned, sort of discarded, because that in and of itself creates a culture in the company that you can tap into when you're called upon to lead perhaps another large project, like the one you just closed.
Well, speaking of gratitude, thank you, Fila, for joining us on the Best Project Portfolio Management Show by Appfire. People can learn more and get more episodes at appfire.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you.